All right. So today's talk is going to be exterminating common jQuery bugs. I'm not talking about bugs that are in jQuery core because some really smart people do a really good job about making sure the jQuery actual library itself is highly tested and really good. What I'm more going to try to explain is some common scenarios that you and I in our development of our applications tend to run into certain problems that are pretty common if you look on Stack Overflow or the jQuery forums. There's a subset of problems that pretty much everyone runs into. So what I wanted to do is share with you what some of those problems are, show you some code snippets, let you have a chance to look at it, describe what the intent is, some example, expose the problem, try to explain really what's going on behind the scenes to educate you on certain ins and outs of jQuery. And then we'll look at exterminating the bug, basically fixing it the best way we can, either the most simple way or maybe I might show several ways to solve the problem, pros and cons of each. And then there might be some extra tips and tricks about certain technologies within jQuery itself. So just a quick who am I? You might be, who is this Elijah character? I'm Elijah Manor. I'm a Christian. I love my family. I enjoy working. I work for a Pin2, which we do training and consulting and products and things like that. I'm a senior architect with them, and I do some consulting with various clients. I'm also one of their trainers. I do a lot of remote training. I did one right before this. I tend to be in the front end these days, so a lot of JavaScript and jQuery, HTML5, CSS3, pretty much everything in the browser is what I focus on a day-to-day basis. I happen to be a Microsoft Regional Director in ASP.NET MVP and an insider as well. You could contact me in my blog or my email, or I'm pretty active on Twitter. And I'll have these again at the end if you want to jot them down. And my Twitter is at the bottom too. So what we're going to start is a common problem, and I call it the chicken or the egg. And the code example that we're going to look at was actually sent to me by a friend who was having a problem, and he knew that I enjoyed jQuery and JavaScript. So he came to me one day and sent me this snippet of code. So we have a table here, and I changed the contents of the table a little bit so it didn't reveal what he was exactly doing. But he had a table with a bunch of rows, and he had contents in each of the rows, and then he had like a delete button that you would click the delete button and it would delete that row. In this case, I'm just listing a bunch of jQuery board members. So nothing too crazy. So his code looked like this. He found all the delete buttons on the page, and he used bind, which there's better ways to do this. We'll talk about later. But anyway, he had a bind, and he was binding the click event, and he was calling this function. It's not too important about what some of this is doing, but it's just grabbing the row, and then it's making an AJAX call to his backend server, which would actually delete that particular entry. And he had a success method, and if it was successful, if it came back from the server successful, then what he was going to do is he was going to hide that row, and then he would remove it. And then on his complete callback, he actually had some code to zebrify his table. And let me tell you what zebrify means. Zebrify is basically creating this alternating color effect, like white, yellow, white, yellow. Now, obviously, there are other ways to zebrify your tables other than using jQuery, which he was using JavaScript to do it. You could do it in CSS. There's lots of other techniques, but anyway, this is the code he had, and it's broken. Now, initially, it looks okay. If we let's delete Corey here. So that deleted, it faded out, but then you notice it starts to look a little awful. It's not zebrifying correctly. Now we have two yellow ones next to each other, and it kind of gets a little funky. Eventually, it might work out. Yeah, it's sort of okay here, but it's definitely problematic. So what I'm going to do is for each bug, I'm just going to wait just a teeny bit, a couple seconds for you to try to pinpoint, see if you can find the bug yourself. And then after a couple seconds, I'll move on and we'll talk about what's the matter and how to fix it. Alright, so hopefully that was enough time for you to find something that might be problematic. Now I'm going to reveal, hopefully these will gray out for you and you could actually see just the highlighted code, the one in bold. So the problem with this code is a couple of things. It really stems down to the fact of this code is asynchronous, which confuses a lot of developers when they come from a world that's not asynchronous. This one, we delve into the event callback of the AJAX call. So if you know the order of event callbacks, in AJAX we have your error or success happens first, and then complete always happens at the end. And so what my friend, he's like, oh, well, I'm always going to say zebrify at the end because by that point, all the rows will be deleted that I just clicked. But that's not the case. This code right here is actually kicking off an asynchronous piece of code. So what we do right here is we're starting an animation. So hide is not an immediate hide. He said to hide it over a half a second. After the half a second occurs, that's when he's removing his row. What's really happening is the success comes in, it starts the animation of removing the row, but before the half a second occurs, it actually fires the complete, which zebrifies the table before it actually removes it. And so then it zebrifies, and then the half a second occurs, and then it really removes the row. So it's kind of this race condition, but it's mainly because he didn't understand that complete will actually fire whenever it's ready. It doesn't necessarily wait until everything that you ever started is done. So it's a very similar problem that deals with a lot of pieces of code, with synchronous and asynchronous code. So a lot of developers, they see synchronous code and they're like, okay, we're going to create a new div here. That completes entirely, and then we're going to add a class right here, and that completes entirely. And then we're going to append that to the DOM. So all those are synchronous actions. One completes before the other one starts. We're starting to get to problems, or you have to kind of change the way you think when you start dealing with asynchronous code. So for example, $.get, hey, we're kicking off an AJAX call. We know that this function's not going to fire until it's really came back from the server. And so you're pretty common. Most people understand about that. This one's a little more tricky. This is asynchronous as well. We're grabbing the header, we're fading it out. So fade out is an animation. What you'll actually see with this code, and this is quite confusing if you've never seen it before, the animation starts here, but then I immediately say remove. So what really happens is the header is removed before the fade out completes, because the fade out will start an asynchronous animation, and probably maybe 5 milliseconds after it started, it will immediately remove it, and it won't actually complete its animation. There's ways around that, but this actually is very confusing for a lot of people. And obviously when you have an event callback that is asynchronous in nature, this function will not be fired until you actually interact with the DOM. So anyway, these are interesting things to know, and how it's a little bit different from maybe some code that you're used to. The easiest way to fix this code is to move the zebra table out of the complete and put it immediately after you've removed the row. It doesn't look the prettiest in the world, but by putting it here, it does fix it, because it starts to animate it, and when the animate's complete, it calls this function. We remove the row, and then we re-zebrify at that point. Now you could have maybe published a message here and subscribed to it somewhere else. There's many ways you could have solved this, but the idea is you need to put the code in the right place, and the way he had it, it was broken. So if we rerun this code, and delete Adam, it zebrifies correctly, we delete Dan, it's continually doing the right thing. Now you may have already solved this problem before, maybe you already know this, that's great. There's many other scenarios that we're going to look at that hopefully you haven't seen before. Now this one is an interesting problem. I actually, when I gave this presentation at the jQuery conference last month, I dropped this point because I only had 30 minutes there, and obviously we have over an hour here. But someone was tweeting me that says, I bet you're going to talk about XYZ, a certain problem. And this is the one that I dropped that he thought I should have mentioned anyway. So thankfully we have time to talk about this one now. And this, so I call it the point of no return. So here's some markup. We have an unordered list, a bunch of list items, and we have data associated with them. So this is using the HTML5 data attribute, and we're just sticking simple numbers in here, nothing crazy. And we want to create a function that will that we could ask it, do you have a certain number? So I could say, list, do you have a number? And I'll pass the list, and then I'll tell it what number I'm looking for. So, for example, if I ask it for 0, it should tell me it's not there. If I said 1 through 10, it should tell me true. Anything else should be false. So here's our code. We pass in the list, and we tell it the number to find. And then we're looking for all the list items. We're iterating over them, grabbing out the data, seeing if they're equal to each other. And then if we find it, we return true. And if it comes out and doesn't find it, we return false. Unfortunately, all of these return false, which is not what we intended. So I'm going to just give you a couple seconds to see if you see what might be the problem. And again, you might not have written this code, but this might be code someone else wrote that was broken, and you have to fix it. And so just give you a couple seconds. All right. So the problematic code is what is highlighted right here. So we have an each statement, and we have a return true here, and then return false here. The each statement, if you haven't read the documentation before, depending if you return true or false, it actually does something special. So let's quickly look at the API a little bit. And again, you might have known this already, but many people don't, and they get hung up on this. So at the root of the problem is the each method. If anywhere inside the each method you return false, that's essentially breaking out of the loop. It basically says, hey, I found what I want. Don't continue to do what you're going to do. But if you return true, it's kind of like a continue, like, hey, get out of the current iteration and go to the next one. If that's the case, then we need to modify our problem a little bit. So what we'll do is we'll have the each. If they are equal, then we'll assign some, we'll say has number equals true, like, yes, I did find it, and then kick out of the loop. And then return the has number. So we're essentially adding a new variable and using that as our basis to tell whether we found it or not, and not using return true or return false to do that for us. So this fix is fairly simple, but the main thing that catches people is return false and return true in each might not do what you expected to do. And so now we get the appropriate results. It didn't find 0 because we didn't expect it to. It found 1, 5, and 10, and it didn't find 15. Another way that you could have solved this problem is use the grep method, utility method. This one, there's actually a con to this technique, but it's interesting to note. It's kind of like a, hey, here's an extra thing you might want to do. So what we could have done is use grep. And so grep is a way to pass in some kind of array and to look for certain criteria. So kind of like a filter if you use underscore. So here's our list. So we're going to grab all the list items. Get will actually give us the raw array, internal array that the internal collection has. So now we have an array. We're going to call this function on each array. We're going to get the value, and we're going to return if it's true or false, if we actually made a match. Everything that made a match of true stays in the result. Everything that's false gets filtered out. And then at the end of the day, we're going to call .length, which if there's 0 items, that's considered false. And if there's more than 1 item, that's considered true. So this is a clever way to rewrite the other one without having the each and doing the return true or return false or whatever. The problem with this one is it doesn't short circuit out. So once it finds it, it continues to look for other ones. So the performance is probably a little bit worse, but maybe you didn't know about grep, and maybe that's fascinating to you. There's actually a whole suite of other utility methods like $.map, which if you've used underscore before, there's a map there. That's a very handy one I use quite often as well. This next problem, I've actually seen really large websites actually have this bug, and I guess it doesn't. actually sometimes I just view source on large websites and poke around. They had this bug. I guess it didn't really make too much of a difference what they're doing, but it was definitely wrong. So let's take a look at this one. I call it Give Me Truth. We're going to make an exercise of making a simple little module over the jQuery UI dialog widget. Now, you may have never used the dialog widget. That's okay. But we're going to make a little wrapper around it. So here's a div. We want this to be our dialog. And here's our code. Now, you might not understand all the module part, like the ify here, but that's okay if you don't. Mostly the innards here is what you need to know. So we're creating this popover module, and we have two methods, one init and one open. So the reason that we made this module, or whoever developed it, is he wanted, when you called init, if you called init more than one time, the developer didn't want you to actually initialize the widget numerous times. Like if it's already been initialized, there's no need to initialize it again. So what he did is he grabbed an instance of the dialog. So he grabbed the div, saved off the div, and he tested, hey, does the div exist? And does the div not have the UI dialog class? Because FYI, most of the jQuery UI widgets, when you initialize them, it will append a whole bunch of classes to the divs and whatever elements you're dealing with to kind of indicate it's been initialized. So we're basically saying, does the div exist and has it not been initialized? And if that's the case, then hey, let's go ahead and initialize our code. So here we're going to initialize the jQuery UI dialog, say it's a modal dialog, and tell it don't open right now. I'm just pre-initializing it, you know. And then we'll have an open method. And so at this point we already have an initialized widget, and so we're just going to open it up. So the problem with this code, and let me show you when I run it. So what I'm doing is I'm calling init, and then I'm calling open, and then I'm calling init again for this code. So here's the first init. Hey, it exists, and it's not initialized. So it goes ahead and initializes. I say open. It goes ahead and opens it. That's good. But when I call init again, it actually is executing the init code, and I didn't want it to. So I'll give you a couple seconds to see if you can figure out why it's getting into this piece of code when it shouldn't be, when it's called the second time. There's actually two bugs with this one if statement. And really there's only two parts to it, so there's a problem with both of them. And both of them relate to the fact of something that's in JavaScript considered truthy and falsy. And if you don't know these terms or what they mean, you could really get into some confusing code, which a lot of people do when they write code like this. So the first thing we need to know is when you do a selection with jQuery, we need to know what it returns. So if I say $, and let's see, if I do $, and I search for the dialog-modal, it actually returns a jQuery object. And objects, if we actually test the value of an object inside of if statement, it actually resolves to something that is truthy in nature. So any object, even if it's an empty object, happens to be truthy. The only falsy values are false, null, undefined, empty string, 0, not a number, and actually -0, which is kind of weird, but it just is. Anything that's not one of those resolves to true. So this piece of code right here that was testing if modal is not doing anything at all. It will always be true, even if it found it on the DOM or even if it didn't find it on the DOM. Because all we're testing is the equality of an object, which is always true. So that's our first problem. Our second problem is this not method. It's not doing what we want it to do, which is kind of funny because it's called not. What not really does, and it's kind of confusing if you've never used the method before, is you pass it a selector and it will filter out any item that matches that set of the internal collection that happens to be in the object. A confusing thing to say, and I really don't see a lot of people ever using that hardly. And the funny thing itself, it returns the jQuery object. So essentially, we're testing twice that jQuery is an object and it's truthy, and it's always going to be true. And so it's always going to get into our if statement. What we really probably wanted to do is something like this. We wanted to make sure that the jQuery object's length property was greater than 0. The length property will tell you how many items that it actually matched against in its internal collection. And then for this other one, there's an is method, which is probably what you meant to use. Is will return a true or a false, and it will test this selector against the items in its internal collection. And so in this case, we're saying, have you found it? So is your length 1 or greater? And do you not match the class UI dialog content? So if I rerun this code, if I call init show and then init again, it inits the first time, shows the second time, and never initializes it ever again because it had already done it. So that's the bug on this one. It's a little more tricky, and again, I've seen this on really large websites. This next one's kind of fun. I call this animations gone wild. What we're going to do here is create a simple little menu, and so if I hover over browsers, a menu will pop down saying, Firefox, Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, etc. And I have a bunch of other menus. The code for it's actually really simple to get started. I grab the menu and all the list items, and I say, hey, when you hover over a list item, when you hover over it, I want to find the unordered list and slide it down. When you hover out, find the list item, or find the unordered list and slide it up. So what that looks like is this. And it's actually, with a little bit of code, it actually does something semi-decent. Now the problem is, if someone gets a little mouse happy, and I don't know how well this is going to do over live meeting, but I'm going to move my mouse left and right a whole bunch of times, and now I'm moving it to the right and I'm letting go. And it's like, crazy menu system, stop. And it's awful. Like, I've actually run into some websites that do this, and it's very frustrating. And it's still going, and I haven't moved my mouse in probably 15 seconds or 20. So obviously that needs to be fixed. I would give you 7 seconds, that's the magic number I wait, so it doesn't seem like forever. But really, there's not a lot of code here. What's really the problem is behind the scenes there's a queuing mechanism. So anytime you do an animation method, it queues it up. And if you keep adding animation methods to this internal queue, then it will wait till animation is complete, and then it will stop, and then pop that off and go to the next one, wait till it's complete. And so that's why we get this huge queuing thing that has to clear out. So the problematic code is basically the slide down and the slide up. The way to actually stop the madness, exactly, someone mentioned in the chat, is to call stop. And again, like, if you were new to jQuery and started using the animation methods, it's not obvious that there's a stop method, but there is, and it's what we need to fix this problem. The stop method actually has 3 different arguments. One is the queue that you're dealing with, and it's optional. By default, everything's in the FX queue unless you define your own queue. I'm not going to show you how to make your own queues, but you can if you want. But most people don't even realize you can make a queue. Anyway, there's one internally called the FX queue. The main one that we're going to deal with is there's a clear queue Boolean where you give it true or false. And if I say true, then I say I want you right now to clear out the whole queue. I don't care if there's 15 other menu droppings. That sounds awesome. I want you to delete them all right now because I don't care anymore. The second Boolean is jump to end. And this one, sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. But let's imagine we are hovering over a menu, and then we hover off. And maybe it's only halfway animated close. If I had stopped everything with a clear queue, it would not continue to finish its animation, the very last one. But if I say jump to end, it will finish everything, and then it will immediately jump to where it would have been when it was done. Sometimes you need that, sometimes you don't. In this particular case, the fix is fairly easy, at least the way I wrote it. I'll show a couple modifications that you can make to make this a little bit simpler. But on hover, before I say slide toggle, I'll actually say stop true true, clear out the queue, and go to the end. If they get out, I'll say clear out the queue and go to the end. So if I run it, I could go crazy, and as soon as I stop, the queuing stops. Now there was a slight delay because we're on live meeting, but on my end where it was fast, it did actually stop immediately. What we could have done, an alternate solution, is the hover event handler. I was showing passing 2. It works on my machine, that's awesome. The hover method takes, I was showing using 2 methods, one when you hover over and one when you hover out. But if you only give hover 1 method, it will actually call this method when I go over and out. So I'm going to reuse the same code because the last slide, this looked almost exactly the same code. Very redundant. So we could reuse the same method, and now we could actually call slide toggle. So instead of saying slide up or slide down, slide toggle is smart enough to know, hey, it's already slid open, so I'm going to slide, I'm going to do the reverse of what it already is. But I make sure to clear out my queue and go to the end. A cool thing is I love the easing algorithms. I don't know if you've seen these before, but they rock. So I'm just adding it for fun. So I'm going to reuse in this code, and you probably can't see this. This is a very sad day because you probably can't see the bouncing. It goes doing doing doing. Yeah, I'm sad for you, but it adds this nice kind of jump jerking bouncing thing. And that's called ease out bounce. If you like to ease out bounce, even though I don't think you could see it very well, there is a whole series of different easing algorithms. Let me pull this up. And let me run this one. So jQuery core comes with 2 easing out algorithms. One is linear, which is very constant, very boring. The default easing algorithm for all the animations in jQuery core is swing. So it starts out kind of boring, and then it slows down a little bit at the end. Starts out constant and slows down at the end. But there's all these other crazy ones. Yeah, ease out, ease in out bounce is the one I like. Doing, 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 doing. And then there's all these other ones you could do. This one starts really fast and then slows down. Or no, it's slow and then fast. Yeah. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. And if you like math, you can make your own easing algorithm if you really want to. So up to this point, we've done something semi-interesting, but it's still kind of weird, the interaction. As soon as I hovered over another one, it was really jerky and probably didn't really anticipate what I really wanted to do. So there is a plugin called Hover Intent, and what this does, it tries to be a little bit smarter. So if I'm moving my mouse around a lot and I haven't really stopped for a second, it doesn't do anything. It waits until I kind of get to where I want to go before it starts jerking around. So this is a little bit better interaction, because if I'm on languages and I want to go to browsers, I probably don't want editors to pop up. So if I quickly pass over editors, it won't come up. So that's kind of nice. The unnice thing about it is the hover intent always takes 2 methods. You can't just pass one that doubles as both, because we mentioned this code looks extremely similar. So if you want to get crazy and handle your own timers, you could use a plugin called Do Timeout. This is a fancy little wrapper around set timeout. The API for set timeout is not the greatest in the world in JavaScript, so Do Timeout is a nice little wrapper that has some interesting features. And so I'm going to use event delegation on the list items, and I'm going to listen to their mouse enter and mouse leave. When someone mouse enters on an item, I'm going to start a new timer called delay toggle, and I'm going to after a half a second, if that timer fires, then I will toggle the menu. So I'll either open it or close it. If I mouse leave, so it'll go to the else statement, then I'm going to toggle the menu, and then I'm going to cancel whatever timer that I had. So this is essentially a cancel. It's not extremely obvious it's a cancel, but it is. I'm going to say do timeout delay toggle. So it's canceling the previous timer. And then my toggle menu, I'm doing a little logic because I don't necessarily like the toggle methods. If I use a toggle method, I like to pass true or false as the second parameter to force the condition. Sometimes I get in this weird case, especially when I toggle a class or something. If I don't pass the true or false as the second parameter, it sometimes gets in this weird case where it does the opposite of what I want. And then from then on out, it's always doing the opposite. So for a lot of the toggle cases, I like to explicitly say what I'm doing. So in this case, I'm doing some of that logic. It's using slightly advanced JavaScript, but I'm figuring out if it's mouse enter, and if it is, then I save off the word down, and then I say slide down and I execute that function off jQuery. But semi-interesting, but the main point is you can make the delayed defect yourself. And I could have extremely simplified this code up here and just made it say slide toggle, but I was just having some fun, and I thought maybe you'd find it interesting at some point in time later. So do timeout's an interesting plugin that you might like at some point in the future. The next bug is, I call it defective data. So there's a data method in jQuery, and it's been around for a long time, but it's recently been retrofitted to work with HTML5 data attributes, because those are the hotness. You know, everyone's screaming about HTML5, right? And this is a new feature adding the HTML5 attributes. So we're going to have this button here, and we're going to have a data confirm text. And this is one of those annoying things where you click on a button and it's like, are you sure you want to do that? So that's what we're going to implement. And we're going to make a plugin that reads this confirm text and will prompt you. And then, you know, if you confirm, then it will do what you wanted. If you canceled, then we'll reject whatever. I'm cutting out some of this code, but I'm creating a new jQuery plugin called Confirm Action. If you've never made a plugin before, you kind of ignore some of this, but the idea applies. I'm going to loop over whatever they passed in their selection. I'm going to grab the HTML5 data attribute. So I'm grabbing data from the confirm text. And then I'm going to wire up a click event. I'm going to namespace it, which you should namespace all your events. The reason you namespace your events, FYI, as a side, so you can easily pull off just the ones you added. It's considered a no-no to remove event handlers that you did not add. So it's a good thing to be able to track those. So what the developer, so this is the person who wrote the plugin. The code from here on is the code, from here down is the code that someone would, you know, consume. So a developer says, I'm going to grab all the buttons and I'm going to put them through this awesome plugin called Confirm Action. So they'll run the plugin on all the buttons, but then you're like, oh, stink. The very first button, I wanted to change the prompt, and I forgot to. So I'm going to grab the first button. I'm going to use the pseudo selector. I'm going to unbind just my event handlers that I namespaced. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want to change the attribute, the data confirm text to, are you really, really, really sure you want to submit? Because, you know, this is extremely sensitive. We have to ask, like, very, very important. And then they call the plugin again. So let's run this code. So here's the code. Here's submit with prompt. Oh, it says, are you sure you want to submit? I wanted it to say, are you really, really sure you want to submit? There must be a bug here, so I'm going to hop out. So see if you can tell. This is a kind of a tricky one, but see if you can pinpoint why it's not actually picking up, are you really, really sure? Because that's what I wanted to say. All right, so the problem is actually these two lines of code. So I'm grabbing the data here, So I'm using the data method, which has been retrofitted to pull in the HTML5 data attributes. And then I'm actually trying to change the data attribute with the attr method. And that's actually the problem. Now, why is it a problem? It's a problem because as soon as the first time you call data to read an HTML5 data attribute, it only does that once, ever. If I change it with the attr method, it will never read it again. I don't know exactly why that was done that way, but that's just the way it is. If you really wanted to change the value that was read in, then you could actually use the data method again. So let's look at this. So the easiest fix is where it said attr here, is just to say data and to say confirm text. Now you might notice a subtle difference that I made from the last one. The last one I had a dash here, and here I had data dash confirm dash text. And I'll explain why I changed this in a minute. But this will fix our code. If we run this, submit, are you really, really sure you want to submit? So now it works like we want, because this reads in data only once from the attribute. If you want to change it after the fact, you modify the data, not the actual attribute, because it will never read that in again. But this will work as expected. The other thing that I changed was the name of the key inside of data. So as of jQuery 1.6, jQuery changed the way they read in HTML5 data attributes to conform to the W3C HTML5 specification, which says when you read HTML5 data attributes, you don't say the data part, you don't say the dash part, and any other additional dashes you remove and you camel case them. And it looks kind of weird. But the reason I changed it, and it would work both ways, which is the interesting part. But if you camel case it correctly and take out the dashes, it will actually work faster than if you had the dashes. And the reason is that jQuery first tries the way that it should be. So with the camel case, it tries that first. If it can't work, then it will actually remove the dashes and camel case it for you and try to do it the appropriate way. So anyway, interesting point that you should consider. As an extra, just an aside, something you might not know, if you do use data attributes a lot, jQuery actually coerces those into types that it thinks that you want. So for example, if I had data-confirm-text, then when it reads that in, that will be text. If I have something that looks like a Boolean, true, when I read that in, jQuery will actually give me a Boolean. And you can, down here I have some test cases. So if I said data math, so again I'm taking off the dash, it will actually be a true. Here I've confirmed text. You see I'm dropping off the data dash and I'm taking off this dash and upcasing the T to conform to the standards. So that would be confirmed text. Operators, it's an array. And so when I pull it in, it'll have a length of 3 because it is an array. This is a number, so it'll actually be a number. And this one is a rich object. It's actually JSON. So when I read it in, it'll actually be a rich object, and I could actually use the dot notation to grab a property, and it would actually render the right, evaluate to the right thing. So semi-interesting. You may or may not know that. So this particular bug is actually a very simple one, but it gets you every once in a while, or some people, maybe not you. But here we have a unordered list of jQuery team members and board members. So nothing too crazy. What we want to do is we want to find all the team members and we want to fade those out. So we just want to leave the board members. So just a quick sanity check. Darcy, when the first 3 ones would go away. Darcy, Chris, and Corey. So if we technically did kick them out. So if we run this code, boom. Nope. Darcy, Chris, and Corey are still there. It did not do what we wanted to. Okay, I'll just give you a couple seconds to see if that is what you wanted, or if you know what the bug is. And this one, there's not a lot of code here it's either the first line or the second line. It looks like someone got the right answer in the Jabber. But the problem is this line right here. We're using the wrong method to actually find what we're looking for. Now, when you say it in English, like I want to find so-and-so, sometimes it's just natural to actually use the find method. But in this case, we really didn't want to do find because we already had the list items in our collection. Find actually gets descendants. It doesn't actually test against what it already has in memory. So we really should have called filter, because filter, basically weans down the list to what we really want. So it's a simple fix, but it could, be slightly annoying if you didn't know that. So in this case, we're going to filter the team and fade it out. Someone mentioned that you could use each. Well, yes, you could use each, but there's an overhead of using each. It's better for jQuery to actually do the implicit iteration for you. So when it's calling fade out here, it's actually iterating over everything in the internal collection. You just don't see it. If you introduce the each method, you're actually explicitly iterating over something that it would have done for you. But yeah, that's good. We're all thinking here, so that's good. So the next one is using a method as an event handler. And this is a common gotcha. It usually leads to frustration, and then it usually leads to someone just saying, and doing some implementation that they don't really like to do. So let's look at this. We have a label that just says, what's your name, some text box, and a button. What we do, we want to create a little conference, and I'm not going to go over too much about prototypes and how they work, but we're creating a new constructor. You could kind of think of that as like a class definition. It's not the same really, but that might help you understand that. Something that we're going to new up. The convention is to start with a capital to convey to developers that, hey, this is something I'd want to new up. There'll be a name and an array of attendees. We'll give it a register method. It's important to actually define the register method outside the constructor, otherwise you'll get new instances of the function for every object. Just a little aside. So I'll stick on the prototype. I'm going to go in here, yada yada, grab the target, add the attendee, whatever's in the input box to the internal array, and I'll say, hey, thanks for registering, and I'll list out how many items are in the array. And then I'm going to clear out the input field. Now, obviously, this is tightly coupled code, which we'd probably want to split out. There's a lot of mixed concerns here, but that's not the point of this bug. We're going to new up the conference and say, hey, give me a new conference, JavaScript Code Camp. Use document.ready, and then what we would like to do is when someone clicks on the register button, we want to reuse this register method that we already have, right, to handle all the code. I don't want to put an anonymous function here, like it's very typical, a lot of people do. I just want to have a one-liner. Hey, it's right here, why can't this work? So let's run this and see what happens. We're going to say, hey, Elijah Manor wants to attend this meeting. Register, type error, cannot call push of undefined. And you're like, stink, JavaScript stinks. And then you start blaming the language and stuff like that. So take a couple of seconds, see if you can find the bug, and we'll talk about numerous ways we can. All right. It's fun to watch the chat room. Okay. So the bug in this is essentially the push, and really, if it ever got to the next line, it would be this one too. In this case, jQuery. So when you give a jQuery an event handler, jQuery is trying to be friendly to you, and it will make sure that this of whatever the callback is will be the element that was actually acted on. A lot of words to basically say that this implicit parameter right here, the one highlighted, will be the button, the DOM button. The DOM button does not have an attendee's property. So when this resolves, that will be undefined. If I try to call a method off of undefined, then kapow, we got an exception, and we didn't try catch anywhere, so kapow, everything breaks, none of this code is executed, and we have a sad day. But wouldn't it be nice if we can make this work? Yeah, I basically said all of that right there. If we want to solve it with jQuery, it's easy enough. There's actually lots of ways we can solve it with just plain JavaScript. But if we wanted to use the jQuery library, as of jQuery 1.4, jQuery added a $.proxy method for this very reason. The $.proxy method allows you to control what this implicit parameter will be when the callback is invoked. So, it's a lot of words, but the way that we can easily fix it is like this. So this code, we can remain the same up here, but all we have to do is surround our conference register with the proxy method. So we say $proxy, I want this method to be called, oops, I think. I want the conference register to be called, and when it's called, I want this implicit parameter to be the conference. So when the conference actually comes in, I told it I wanted this to be the conference. So now it will be conference.attendeesPush, and that is exactly what I wanted. So if I run this code, it will say, thanks for registering, one registered user. And I could keep using it just like I could. Now, as an aside, there are many ways we could have solved this problem without the $.proxy. $.proxy was implemented mostly to be to make it really easy for developers to get started with this concept and not have to know some of the alternate ways that tend to be more advanced JavaScript techniques in nature. Now, you might know them, but not everyone does. What we could have done, we could have made an anonymous function, and we could have just called conference.register. That would have been one way, and that's actually not too crazy. And then we would just pass the event. That actually is a simple fix. But of course, I wanted to show you $proxy. We could have used conference register call. Now, call is a method off of every function that we can make where we could control this implicit parameter. So I'm going to call this method, and I want this to be conference, and then I'm going to pass the event arg. Apply is another way to do a similar thing, where I want to basically invoke a method, and I want to control the value of this. So this will be conference. And then the arguments for apply, the second one is an array of things that are passed to it, so I'm just going to say I'm passing E. If you're using ECMAScript 5, which modern browsers have, you could actually use the bind method and just tell it what the value of this is. So there are lots of ways to do this, but $proxy works too. Or you could use underscores bind as well. There's, again, lots of ways. Yeah, that's a big topic, so I'm briefly skimming over that, but if you can remember $proxy, that will get you probably where you need to go. I call this one the suspicious selector. Again, this is another person that sent me some code, and they're like, why is this not working? So this is a snippet of JSF, which I briefly wrote for a short duration, and I'm glad I'm not anymore. But sorry if you're doing it. But so this is the code. He had the form, yada yada. So JSF prepends a lot of stuff to your IDs and names. It kind of mangles them a little bit. It feels kind of like old web forms when you couldn't have pretty IDs and stuff like that. So anyway, it gave all this junk. And basically he said, I want to do something like this. I want to grab the element with a person form ID, and it happened. So this is the actual ID of the element, person form : first name. And so if it's an ID, we put the pound there. We run the code. If it worked, these would be outlined in red. Sorry about this weird. This doesn't look very good, but so obviously it's not working. can you spot the bug? The bug is kind of tricky in that, and you don't run it into it very often because a lot of times you have control of your own names. But when you don't have control of your names, there's actually characters that aren't really allowed in a selector. You could put them in there, but you have to escape them. jQuery abides by the W3C CSS specification rules. And so if you have any of these characters, like bang, hash, $, yada yada, you have to escape them. And some of it's partly obvious. Like if you have a pound inside your ID name, then that obviously conflicts with the pound to indicate that it's an ID. And so you have a conflict there. So one thing you could do, yeah, you call it a hash too, is, so this does not work if it had a period or a colon or a $. All those would be failures. So here, here's the ID of the element, so this won't work. If you really want to do that, you would need to escape it with 2 backslashes, which seems quite severe. So if we had foo.bar is our ID, we would have to say pound foo // .bar. Now it seems very clumsy, but that's what you have to do if you want it to get to work. So the way to get around our problem is we'd say pound person form // colon first name. We run that, and now we have a nice red border around our first name input box. Seems ugly. So to fix all the other ones, you just basically escape all those special characters. Now, if you get crazy, I actually wrote an escape selector method where I'm using regular expressions to try to clean this up. And then I'm going to replace it and hash it, or escape it for you. Actually, the full regular expression didn't parse well with the code that actually parses these to make it look nice. So I just kind of truncated it. But the way you would call this, and it's a little clumsy, is you would have the ID and then you would call escape selector. It would go ahead and escape everything appropriately, and then that's when you go back and put the pound sign that indicates an ID. It's not the best in the world, but it's just something I'm playing around with. But really, I don't run into this problem very often because I have control over what I'm doing. And I don't have a tool doing this for me. So anyway, that might be interesting to you. The next one we'll look at, I call erratic events. And this one confuses a lot of people. So let's look at it. And this is a silly kind of example, but just roll with me. We're going to have a to-do list, a big unordered list. Each list item will have a checkbox and an anchor. Essentially what I want to happen is if they click anywhere within the unordered list, even if it's a click, I want to print out what time it is. If they click on an anchor, I'll want to click what time it is. If they click on a checkbox, I'll want to update what time it is. So kind of silly. But yeah, so here I'm going to, any click that's on the to-do, I want to print out the date in the footer. Anytime someone clicks an anchor, I want to console log, and I really want to do some AJAX call to pull like detailed information or something, but I didn't want to write that in here. And then I return false because I don't really want it to redirect to a different page. And then anytime someone clicks on an input, then I'm going to, it should do some AJAX call to like update the server that it's been checked or not, etc. So when I run this, there's actually a subtle bug. So here, if I click anywhere in the unordered list, it's updating this time down here every time, which is great. If I check it or uncheck it, it updates the time. And if I click one of the anchors, you'll notice it's not updating the time. It is doing what I want, although it's off the screen, but it's not updating the time. So it is console logging the href, but it's not updating the time. I'm going to give you a couple seconds to see if you can figure the bug, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so the problem here is the return false. And this brings up a whole conversation about what that really does. A lot of front-end developers who are getting started don't really realize what this is really doing. So here's a little picture of what's happening behind the scenes. Let's say, for example, I clicked on an input field. What happens? jQuery says, hey, someone's clicked on an input field. Are there any event handlers attached to this input field? If there are, they'll go ahead and execute. And then it will go up to its parent, to the list item, and jQuery says, hey, someone clicked on the input. You're the parent, so I just want to let you know, are there any event handlers listening to a click? And if there are, it'll fire it. And it basically keeps going up all the parents until it gets to the top of the document. And the document says, hey, someone clicked on the input field. Are you listening for any clicks anywhere? And it could have functions up there as well. What's happening is when I return false, it's telling it to not go up the tree. And we really want it to go up the tree because we had an event handler on the unordered list listening for changes so we could update the time. So the answer to this problem, and someone mentioned in the chat, is we need to say prevent default instead. So the event that gets passed in, you could actually call methods off of it. There's a prevent default, which that means what we really wanted to do is just not redirect to some other URL. Prevent default says, hey, don't really go to another URL because it's an anchor. In a similar fashion, the submit event, if you say prevent default, it will not submit its contents to the server because if there's valid fields that aren't filled in, then that's what you'd want to do. So the easiest way to fix this is not to do return false, to say prevent default. And it will continue to bubble up the DOM tree and go to its parents and other parents, and this onClick will fire because this is its parent. This is the unordered list parent. The interesting thing that not a lot of people know about is return false is really just event prevent default and event stop propagation. Stop propagation is the same thing as don't bubble up the DOM. By saying return false, you're really saying do both of these. Don't go where you want to go, and don't actually let anyone else know what just happened. So typically you don't want to return false, because the more advanced JavaScript in jQuery you start to write, the more and more you should rely on event delegation. The fact that events are bubbled up to some higher element. And by saying stop propagation, you're basically destroying all of that code. You're possibly breaking lots of stuff you don't know about. So I recommend doing return false unless you really, really know what you're doing, and don't saying stop propagation unless you know what you're doing. And obviously, if you're typing that, then hopefully you know what you're doing. There's actually something else called stop immediate propagation, which is interesting. I've only needed to use a handful of times, but it says, so prevent default, don't redirect to some of the screen, and stop immediate propagation. Don't even let other event handlers on this particular anchor tag fire. Like, stop it immediately in its tracks. Obviously don't let any parent know, but don't let anybody else in the array of event handlers that should be fired even be triggered. So it's a kind of a big hammer right there. So there's some interesting things to know about. The last one before we stop for questions is switching to the on method. Now, I wrote this really long, elaborate post on the difference between bind and live and delegate and on, the pros and cons of each, performance, all these things. And so I've had people come to me and say, hey, I read the article, it's great. So I went ahead and, live is being deprecated, so I went ahead and changed all my lives to on, but now they're broken, and, and they're coming to me and I'm like, oh, stink. And almost immediately I know what the problem is. So let's look at this, and we'll kind of dig through a problem that you might have if you're converting some of these things. And it's actually a very problematic issue. I don't think it's well defined. for many people. So we have this unordered list of list items, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a button. When you click it, what we want to do is add a new item to the list. So the old code someone had written, they said, give me all the list items. I'm going to do a live handler on click. So anytime they click it, run this code, and they converted it to an on, and this worked just fine, even though there's lots of issues with it, which we're not going to talk about right now. But they converted it to an on because this is being deprecated, and so they said they just pretty much replaced live with on. And when they click the button, I added it to the DOM. So the old ones, when I clicked 1, that worked. If I click 2, that worked. If I put a new item and click the new item, it's not responding. So it's like, oh, stink. The live used to work because it would actually work with this. But when I convert it to on, it's broken. So I'll give you a couple seconds. And the bug is right here. It's actually on the on itself. One of the things that's interesting, a lot of jQuery methods are overloaded, and I have air quotes. If you saw a video, you would see me making my little fingers go up and down. Depending on how you call the on method, like what parameters and what order, it will behave differently. And that is not obvious. On is great. It has many great things to it. It brings a uniformity to a lot of the various event binding methods. Instead of having like 5 different ways to do it, well, not 5, but many ways, it combines it to 1, so it feels unified. It simplifies the jQuery code base, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It still has all the goodness of the delegate method, which is awesome. And you can still do the bind if you want to, because those behave very differently. But the main con is it confuses people, because I think a lot of people don't realize, depending on how you use it, it behaves differently. So the fix is this. We have to use, in order to do the event delegation that live does, so backtrack just a second. When you used to call live, it wasn't magic, it wasn't polling or listening to the DOM. It actually put the function, this event handler, on the document, like the very top of the tree. And it stored some metadata that, hey, this function, anytime someone clicks on a LI, it stuck all that metadata onto the document. When events are bubbled up, they bubble up all the tree. Like you clicked on an anchor tag, maybe no one's listening, so it bubbles up all the way to the document. And then jQuery looks through all its metadata and says, hey, someone clicked me. Did it happen to be you? Were you a list item? It's like, oh, stink. Yes, I am. I'm a list item. And so it'll go ahead and invoke this function. So it's not doing magic. So we could actually simulate that with the on. So we'll tell it we want to select the document, because that's the same place live was sticking all its stuff. And we want to say on click for a list item, we want to run this function. So what this does, it'll stick this function and all this metadata and shove it on the document in like a little array of metadata. And then again, when you interact, when you click on a list item, nothing's directly listening on that element, because that's what a bind does. So it'll go to its parent, and anybody listen to me, and it goes all the way up to the document, and that's where all the metadata is living, and jQuery will go ahead and execute that for you. So that's why it works with dynamic stuff, because there's nothing attached to each element like the bind. So the bind, the way it worked, it actually stuck your event handler on the element itself. And that's why things kind of broke. So when someone rewrote this and just had one, they didn't actually split out the on, it was just behaving like a bind, and that was why it's broken. A quick rundown of how you convert your methods. If you had a bind that looks like this, so if you have a click event handler, it's just a wrapper around bind. So these two are similar. So click is just a wrapper around bind click. So if you wanted to convert either of these to an on, it is as simple as just replacing the method name with the on. And that's why we're having a problem before. Now live, if they actually had a selector and said live and click, that's where you have to select the document, the place where you put in all the metadata, and then you say on, click, and then your selector. So shove all that information on the document, and when it needs it, it will execute it. The delegate's actually not too hard to switch around, because delegate already would store where you wanted all the metadata. So at this point, we wanted to shove all our metadata on the members element. And all you have to do is swap these parameters. So here is li click, and we just switch it to click li. That might seem like a silly thing to do, but it actually brings a lot of conformity, because each of these techniques has an on click, on click, on click. Like, it feels very unified in the way you do it. But as you'll notice, depending if you use 2 parameters or 3, it behaves very differently. 2 parameters shoves the function directly on the elements itself. So if there were 5 anchors, it would shove the function on 5 different elements. Whereas this is actually kind of delaying and relying on event delegation. A lot of words to say. You should use the on method. If you do not use the on method, internally it will use the on method for you. Because if you use bind, so this is the jQuery source code. If you call bind, it's just a one-line pass-through to the on method. If you call live, it's just a one-line pass-through to on. If you call delegate, it's just a one-line pass-through to the on method. So if you're not using the on method already, really you're actually using it already. So you might as well explicitly use it, otherwise it's just a one-line pass-through and it's kind of silly. So, but you'll notice it cleans up the code a lot, because all these other methods are just one-line pass-throughs to on. Now, someone asked me, well, why don't they just deprecate all these ways? But that's not going to happen. I mean, there's enough people that use delegate and bind that would be a nightmare for compatibility for older code bases. So anyway, that is it. I think we have a little bit for questions. You can catch me on my blog, Twitter, or Gmail. And I hope you learned at least one thing. If you haven't run into all these, hopefully I've prevented you from running into some of them. And I will look at the Jabber, see if there's any questions. I am recording this, so hopefully it'll be up soon. Let's see.
All the sessions will be available for download after the conference ends. We're just waiting for some questions to come in. If they are, I think I can see some people typing in Java there. But whilst they're doing that, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. It's very enlightening. I think most of us have fallen foul of every single one of them at one time or another.
Yeah.
So I for one have learned quite a lot. So thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
So just wait for one question that did come in that's not necessarily related. What are you using for your presentation?
Yes, this is something that, since I'm a trainer at Pin2, we internally developed this this presentation framework. We use Markdown to generate it, and all the code is dynamically injected inside of a sandbox, so I could actually run the samples on the slides. The intent is that we will open source this, and it is very easy to swap in out modules. Like all these modules down here are individual Markdown files, and I could either take or remove them very easily. I could the things on the side, I could turn that on or off, but it's a way to kind of group progress and kind of organize things really well. But yeah, everything is very slick. The amount of time it takes me to put it together is significantly reduced compared to the old ways I used to do things. So,
and one thing that might not be clear here, this is running in Chrome.
Yes, it does run Chrome. I tested it in IE9 and it seemed to work fine, but I'm just used to running in Chrome, so that's what I did. But I do have these hosted on. There's a couple of formatting things when I export this, because I'm actually running a server to host these, but when I exported, there were a couple of CSS issues, but the main content will be there. You might have to zoom in or out to see everything, but yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.